Welcome back to another episode of the Move to Spain podcast. In a while, we're going to hear Vernon and myself discuss tax. But at the moment, next, we will hear from Anna, our visa lawyer, all about obtaining Spanish citizenship. So, hi, Anna, how are you?
Hello, hi, nice to meet you.
Right. So this is a good one because on the Move to Spain Facebook group, this is something that people ask. And we also have a group about Spanish citizenship by descent. And I think there's about 3,000 people in that group. And it's obviously something that people ask about. So I thought, well, what could be better than having an audio with you on the podcast, and we can post it in the group and we can answer all the questions. I guess the first question just has to be how to get Spanish citizenship by descent.
Okay, well, there is the different options, but right now, what is the, let's say, not most popular, but one of the ways it's still possible is the democratic memory law, which is active until the 22 of October 2025. Well, we expected that it will be renewed for 1 year more because it's a lot of the applications and approvals. So, democratic memory law, let's say, provide you the possibility to apply if you are the son or daughter or grandson or granddaughter of originally Spanish. So, for
Right.
example, someone of your family born in Spain have a birth certificate, and this is possible. Another option, for example, if your mother lost her citizenship, for example, by marrying the person with another citizenship, that's also the option. So basically, we have the most popular, let's say, it's the option A, being a son or grandson of originally Spanish.
Right. So if, for example, my mother, father, grandmother, grandfather, which could be one, two, could be six different people. If one of those people were Spanish, then I can get a Spanish passport.
Exactly, originally Spanish. For
Yeah.
example, how we can prove it with the birth certificate, the Spanish birth certificate, or the baptism certificate that there is in one of the church registry have a note that this person born in Spain.
Right. What happens if I'm adopted? My adopted mother or father is Spanish. How does that work?
Well, in this case, it's complicated to prove because they want to see the line. In this case, much recommendable is to go through the, let's say, if you under the 18 or already 18, you have a possibility if your mother or father is Spanish and have Spanish passport. But the democratic memory law is more for the direct line. Let's say we will have to study these options, of course, because each law have their own exclusions. But this is
Right.
the good way.
Right. Okay. And say, for example, I've just heard in the family history that my grandmother was born somewhere in Galicia or something like that. Do we have people? Do you have people who can go and find the birth certificate, or how does that work? Or the baptism record?
Okay. Well, in this case, we have several options. Like, for example, if you don't have a solicitor or someone who represents you, you can ask for the birth certificate from the civil registry at the consulate. So, with the name, at least the some information from where your grandfather or grandmother were born in Spain, they could give you this certificate. Then, if you have someone who can represent you, certificate and digital certificate in Spain, for example, you can apply online, or we can make the request to the civil registry or different civil registries if you do not know the zone, but you know it was in Galicia, for example, and find the birth certificate of your grandfather or grandmother. But for this, of course, we need first authorization that we can act on your behalf, and then the information, at least the name, complete name of your grandfather, grandmother. If you know the names of your great grandparents, for example, an approximate zone. So because there could be in this zone 5 or 6 civil registries, and we'll have to send the request, let's say, to each one of them. And if there is not successful, then calling them and contacting them directly and trying to find the certificate.
Are all the certificates available, or is it the case that some records were perhaps destroyed in the war, or it was just a small village and there was no paperwork? It was just maybe like written in a baptism record in a church that got bombed, or what about things like that? How does that work?
In this case, it's absolutely complicated to find some record. Let's say, yes, we had some cases when it's absolutely nothing we can do. It's absolutely a new record. So, well, you can submit at the consulate that, yes, you have some information that your grandparents were originally Spanish, yes, but let's say each consulate will have their own interpretation. And in
Yeah,
majority, they will ask exactly the birth or baptism certificates. So, well, it's dependent on the consulate, of course.
yeah, yeah.
Probably they will refuse it.
Yeah, it's right to say that a lot of consulates make a lot of different decisions to other consulates, and it can be
Yes.
a big mess. I mean, we had a chat on one of the podcasts about the earnings for one of the visas, and different consulates make different decisions or different interpretations of the law. So even if you can't get the birth certificate or the baptism record for some reason, then still get in touch with Anna and there might be something we can do. I mean, presumably, if I don't know, they have an old agreement where they rented a house. They have a proof that they got on a boat from San Sebastian to New York in 1899, or the consulate would
Well,
just interpret that information and reach a decision.
yes, let's say it's not recommendable because what they want to see is the bloodline. Basically, that your grandparents was originally Spanish, born in Spain, and then they transfer you this Spanish citizenship. For example,
Mm,
originally the standard line is that you have a grandparent who is Spanish, and then your parents or your father, for example, born, and your grandfather subscribed him as the originally that's born in a Spanish citizen, and then he transferred the citizenship to you. Let's say like this. It's the standard path. But
right,
the democratic memory law, we let's say can jump from one generation, saying that your grandparents was originally Spanish, your father or mother, for example, not, and you would like to apply for this because of him originally Spanish.
right. What about if say for example, my great grandparent was Spanish by birth, and say for example, my mother's still alive, but she hasn't got Spanish citizenship. Can she get Spanish citizenship and then I get it from her? Can that
Yes.
happen?
Yes, it could happen, absolutely. And
Right.
in this case, when some of the consulates allow that, we can submit 2 applications at the same
Oh
moment.
wow. Wow.
The Annex 3 allows to the children's, once the parents receive the citizenship by the democratic memory law, applies for the citizenship also. So in this case, when your mother submits for the Annex 1, by being the granddaughter of originally Spanish, at the same time we submit this. In this case, you have to submit this application by your mother. So you will be in a holding until your mother's is resolved, but
Right.
you will be already in the process. So we presume that as you are in the process and the consulate, even if the law is already stopped as your application in the consulate, they have to give you some notification.
Right. So in that example, my mother, my great grandparents, so my mother goes for citizenship at the same time as I do, and we just put the applications in together. Oh, okay, that
Yes.
makes it a lot simple.
Again,
Now,
in these cases, I have to make one note that each consulate have their own rules. Just I want to repeat it
yeah,
in different times because one consulate may accept it, another consulate say no, first one, then another one. So previously we have the consultation with each consulate where you will make the application, and then we will say yeah, it's
Yeah.
possible or not possible, and or we have to wait or not.
Yeah, we need to get Anna an engraved plaque that says each consulate may make a different decision to another consulate. It's not my
Yeah.
fault. So remember, we're not being difficult. It's just that Anna's got so much experience at this, but doing other visas, digital nomad, non-lucrative visa, etc., that she knows all the consulates and she knows that different consulates make a different decision. Now, I think I know the answer to this question, but does my mother still have to be alive to get citizenship?
Depend on the situation. If you apply through your grandfather, then no, you directly receive by your grandfather. In case your mother is already passed away and you would like to apply through your great grandfather, in this case, well, there's one unique option which we would find is, sus- let's say, try to subscribe if your grandfather also was somehow Spanish. Subscribe your mother's birth as Spanish, for example, post-mortem, which is complicated, takes a lot of time, and
Oh,
according
right.
to
Yeah. Yeah. So it's
right
not,
now, it has to be detailed studied the path of Spanish citizenship through your family if she could be originally Spanish, let's say
yeah. Yeah. So
Spaniard at that moment that we can subscribe her, and in this case you can apply. But I mean, it's very, very complicated and took a lot of time at the consulate. So in this case, we can have the situation that the democratic memory law is already gone at that moment.
right. Okay. What about the people who lost the citizenship because they were forced out of Spain because of the Civil War?
Well, in this case, we have to prove that, for example, your parent or grandparent was exiliated for the reason of the war in another country. He had to go. There are several situations that we can prove, but he had to anyway be originally Spanish.
Yeah. So I
With
have a grandfather. He was born in, I don't know, let's say Madrid for a change, and he had to leave Spain, or maybe a great grandfather. Yeah, I have a great grandfather, and he had to leave Spain because of the war. He was forced out, and he relinquished his citizenship. He went to, I don't know, America. If that happened, then it's possible for to get citizenship, isn't it?
yes, yes. There is also mentioned that we have to prove that he had to leave because of this war, because they were following him, and the reasons that with
Yeah,
documents, of course, all with documents. If it's just let's say we presume that yes, he may leave for this, but we do not have any proof. The consulate, let's say, um, in this case, it's better to apply directly because your grandfather was originally Spanish, and that's all.
yeah, yeah. But even if it's for example, my great grandfather, then there's and all my other family are dead. There's a possibility using the war, but it's very difficult.
Yes, yeah, and mostly because during the war, the majority of the documents are lost, and we have the situations when we can't find the end where the document is, where for example, even the church is what you were saying at the beginning that
Right.
complicated to prove it
Yeah.
with the document sometimes.
So if somebody is born, they just have to be born in Spain and have like a baptism record or a birth certificate. And after that, if they spend their whole life in, I don't know, Buenos Aires, it doesn't matter. They were Spanish at birth, and that's how it works.
Basically, yes, but some consulate may ask the naturalization certificate, for example, that you lose your citizenship or not. For example, like sometimes happen with Cuba when stopped to
Yeah.
be Spanish, had the time to declare the conservation of the Spanish citizenship. In this
Mm.
case, it may be possible because we have papers that prove that the great grandfather wanted to conserve the Spanish citizenship, and he was originally, let's say, Spanish at that moment when the Cuba becomes, let's say, becomes the state. In this case, would could be entered, let's say, in this democratic memory law because he declared that he wanted to be Spanish, and we have proof of it.
Right. What about exams? Do I have to do an exam? I mean, hypothetically, I'm going through my grandmother, who is from Galicia. I don't speak a word of Spanish, and I want my Spanish passport. Do I have to do an exam in Spanish?
No, you don't need to do tests. You will only need to make the Spanish test and social test if you came from non-speaking Spanish country, of course, and if you came by the residency. Citizenship by residency. For example, general regime 10 years, a special regime for the.
Yeah, but say for example, I'm going through my grandmother born in Galicia, and I'm not going through 10 years residency in Spain or 2 years if I'm from, I don't know, Argentina. If I'm just going through my grandmother born in Galicia, for example, I don't have to do an exam or anything.
No, you don't. No.
Okay, right.
And also there is the possibility to conserve the double citizenship. That's why it's very interesting, this law, because by this you do not need to renounce your citizenship. If, for example, with the United States, we do not have the double citizenship. There is no obligation to renounce United States citizenship if you go through the uh, democratic memory law.
Yeah, yeah. We need to make it clear that just because you get a Spanish passport, you don't have to renounce your citizenship. Now, another point, and not really related to this, but if I have a Spanish passport and I don't want to come and live in Spain, but I think, oh, I quite fancy going and living in France or Italy, then I would be able to do that, wouldn't I, with a Spanish passport?
Yes, you can, but let's say you have to register yourself at the consulate and declare that you want to conserve your citizenship.
Right.
Let's say
Okay.
if you don't do it during the first 3 years, then you can lose it.
Right. Yeah. So again, even if you get a Spanish passport and Anna deals with it all, and you want to go and live in, I don't know, Greece, then make sure that you speak to Anna because you have to conserve the Spanish citizenship, even though you don't want to live in Spain, because obviously the EU, you can Google it, it's a big list of countries. You've got freedom of movement with a Spanish passport, which is an EU passport. So if I have a Spanish passport, I would get free healthcare, presumably.
Well, presumably, but at the beginning, yes, but you have to make the contributions to the social security, taxes, or just a simple fact that you have the Spanish passport, they can make you a lot of the troubles about it because
All right. So just because I have a Spanish passport doesn't automatically mean I can just go to the Spanish public health system and say, treat me. That's
well,
free.
you can try. Let's say you can try, yes, but the Spanish bureaucracy, they will ask you a lot of the documents, and if you just came and obtain it, they can, let's say, put you troubles.
We do have to stress it's not part of this podcast, but if you go and listen to the other podcasts, obviously for English people, paying for healthcare is unusual and it's expensive. But for people from America, health insurance in Spain is very, very cheap. And after the first year, if you don't want to continue, you can pay and join the Spanish system. It's about 60 euros a month if you're under 65, 120 euros a month if you're over 65. Everyone's accepted. It doesn't matter. You can be at death's door. You'd be accepted in the public
Yeah.
system. So a bit of good news if you're from a country where they don't have inverted commas. I don't want to get shot. Inverted commas, free healthcare, free at the point of delivery, as we say in England. But somebody has to pay for it, of course. But yeah, that's quite interesting. So the democratic memory law, where you can get Spanish citizenship through your grandmother or grandfather. We think that's going to end in October 2025.
Yes, the 22nd of October 2025.
Right.
It's had to become the end last year, 2024, but they renewed it for 1 year more. So hopefully they will renew it for another year, let's say.
Right. Anna doesn't know. Just keep following the Move to Spain Facebook group and listen to the Move to Spain podcast to find out. We're recording this on the 21st of February, so that gives us about 8 months, 8 months, 8 months and a day. Now, is it the case that the application is made before that date, as long as you get the application in, or how does it work?
Yes, the application already at the consulate had to be done before the date. In this case, well, they will take it in.
So don't, I remember one judge giving a decision once, it wasn't in my case, says, don't use time limits as a target. This is the worst case scenario. Don't be coming to Anna on the 21st of October and saying, Anna, I think my grandmother from Asturias, don't do it. Let's have some time to make the application, people. Don't use the time limit as a target, as a thing of last resort. Give Anna some time, like Pablo with the taxes. Don't come at the end of I think it's June. Don't come on the 29th of June and say Anna needs to study this and make sure everything's right. So get the paperwork together. You have to check it. It has to go off. And we need some time. So don't come on the 21st of October. We don't want to we don't want to do that.
And most of all, because let's say it's not just show that your grandparents were originally Spanish with their birth certificate. The birth certificate have their time life limit. Let's say some consulate will take it for forever, and other will take it for 6 months only, for
Right.
example. And
Yeah.
then we have to show the complete line from your grandfather until you. So it's
Yeah.
a grandfather birth certificate,
Yeah.
then marriage certificate, and grandmother birth certificate, even if she wasn't originally Spanish. Then birth
Right.
of your parents, marriage of your parents, and then your birth. So we have to show absolutely everything until you. And if it's out of Spain, it has to be with apostille,
Right.
like
Yeah. So just
certificate to translate.
yeah. It's like a jigsaw puzzle. You've got to. Well, that's a wrong example. You've got to join the dots from you to your grandparent, as it were, to get the citizenship. And of course, Anna is an expert in this, but Anna doesn't know if it's going to be renewed for another year on the 22nd of October. We've got no idea if that's going to happen or not.
Oh yes, hopefully it will. We
Yeah.
I presume it will be around the mid of summer when we could have some knowledge about it. But right now, the 22nd of October is the end of this
Yeah.
law.
I mean, look, it doesn't, as my grandmother said, it doesn't cost anything to be optimistic. So let's be
Yes.
optimistic that it's going to continue. But hopefully, enough people listen to this podcast and their circumstances aren't going to change on the 23rd of October. Get the application in now, and we've got, more than one lawyer specializing in this. There's paralegals, secretaries. We can do the application for you. Well, is there anything else you want to add? Because obviously I know nothing about this and I'm just asking you questions that I see on the Facebook groups that we have.
Okay. Well, I have to make a notice that the consulate deal directly with the applicant. So we provide the information, we check the documents, finding where your birth certificate, contact with the consulate about the case, resolve it. But what they want is that we prepare your letter, let's say the email, what you have to do, the documents completely prepared, but then you have to send it from your email to the consulate. The
Right.
consulate have their own rules, each one how they would like to see it,
Yeah.
in the one wants in an email, another wants all the documents, another one just application form. So you send it, they give you the answer stating that yes, we received your documents, everything is good. So we now can what? You now
Yeah.
can or book your appointment,
Yeah.
or now you can directly come this day and this time and
Yeah.
submit, show to us the original papers with the copies where
Mm.
we hit. And this since the second day when you already visit the consulate, it's in process. So first email, it's not a process. First email, they're just checking if you complete the requirements. Then second one, if they already taken your documents, then it's already you are in the process because they will provide you with the
Yeah.
information, the registration, with the proofs that they already took your case in process.
Yeah. And even if you don't want Anna to act for you throughout the whole process. You can just have a consultation with Anna in person if you're in Fuengirola or online anywhere in the world. Check the time difference, and Anna can give you advice if you just want to just have a consultation with Anna. Or of course, you can instruct her to do the whole thing for you. She tells you exactly what to do for the process.
Yeah.
So what's the success rate then? What's your success rate? Do you know?
It's let's say it's very good at success rate, uh, but it's very long process.
Right,
Right.
right. So don't,
Uh,
yeah.
so
Okay.
so don't expect that it will be resolved in a half year. Well, it,
Yeah.
we had cases when yes, but let's say
Well, the good thing is, as I said, to repeat myself, your circumstances are not going to change from now until the 23rd of October. So get it in now, and then the process has started. And if it ends, if it isn't renewed on the 22nd of October, then your application has been submitted, and you're on the train track to Spanish
yeah.
citizenship. And the other thing that we just discussed very briefly, we haven't confused anyone. For example, I'm English. For me to get a Spanish citizenship, I would have to live in Spain for 10 years and
Yeah.
do an exam. If I was from Argentina, I would have to live in Spain for 2 years and do an exam. But I'd have to be even that, even the 2 years, the 10 years, it has to be here with with a visa. So that's like slightly different. And again, that's something that Anna deals with, like the non-lucrative visa, the self-employed visa, the digital nomad visa, the golden visa, but that ends on I think the 3rd of April, the golden visa,
Yes.
doesn't it? So
Unfortunately.
yeah. Well, yeah, we don't think that one's going to get renewed. So the golden visa is the one where you buy properties and things like that. But you would be cutting it a little bit fine if you buy a property and then you need to get it registered and then you need to get a golden visa application. But yeah, speak to Belen would be the expert on that. But as always, listen to the Move Spain podcast. Look on the different Facebook groups because every week something changes, doesn't it? And you just have to keep up to date with what's going on.
Yes, it's the most recent changes that we have. It's 20th of May of this year when the new law reglement will came in force, and
Yeah.
there's the modifications. So
If you go on our TikTok, Just Lost Listeners, our YouTube channel, Just Lost Listeners, I have a stab at talking about the new visa coming in May. We don't have all the details. And that's about looking for a job in Spain. But I don't think at the time I did the video, they hadn't released all the different sectors. But we can do a video on that. That's nothing to do with Spanish citizenship. But just
yeah,
remember,
yeah,
something happens in May. Golden visa ends on the 3rd of April. 20 something of May, the new visa comes out. 22nd of October, we see what happens with the citizenship by descent, see if that's been renewed. But just, it's a big complication sometimes, but stay tuned and we'll keep you right. Okay, Anna, well, thanks for coming on, Anna. I know it's Friday afternoon and you want to be out the door.
well, we will continue working.
Go
It's
home,
never
go.
stopped.
Yeah, I can imagine. I can imagine. Well, thank you very much. And as always, thank you. And we'll see you at some point next time. And we do have the live events on Facebook, on the Move to Swing Facebook group. Anna comes and she answers your questions live, and we'll have to do one of those soon. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, Anna.
You're welcome. See you soon then.
And we're joined by Vernon Pierce, podcast regular now, Vernon.
Yes, great to meet you again and speak to you again, John. And from the sunny Costa Blanca, as a retired ex-UK resident, I must say that life up here is still very, very happy, and it's very sunny at this time of the year.
Yeah.
And I'm regularly watching the posts on Facebook, on the Facebook group.
Yeah, the Move to Spain Facebook group. Yeah, I think we're up to about 200 30,000 people now. Just a couple of points then before we start. First off, you have to read Vernon's book, A Tick in the Box, not a legal textbook. I don't know if it says a tick in the box underneath in brackets, not a legal textbook, close brackets, but we always say that.
No, we say that quite clearly in the sort of introduction to it.
Okay.
And, it's selling well. And what we're very satisfied with is the feedback comments from people who've read it, because most of the comments I find on Facebook and the inquiries are all about people who are very interested in how they can get a visa, can they get a visa?
Yeah.
But really, to me, before you even ask that question is, do I want to move to Spain? Will I be happy there? Will I be happy leaving the family behind, and so on? So it's about, and the reason my wife and I wrote it is it's about the change to the way of life rather than the legal niceties and the visa requirements. So no, it's not a textbook. It's a story of our lives here, and we're now into our 17th year, 18th year, and we're just about to celebrate our 50th wedding anniversary. It can't be too bad.
Yeah, it can't be too bad if you must both agree that staying in Spain is good after 17 years.
Exactly. And I think that's the most important thing, because it's not always something which both partners agree on, particularly if you're leaving behind children, grandchildren, and friends and so on.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons for wanting to talk on with you today is that I notice more and more of the questions on the Facebook group now are from people who are concerned about tax and their pensions and whether they can carry on claiming their pensions in the UK and so on. So I thought maybe if we talked about our experience, my wife and I, we're not tax experts, and you have a guy who is much, much more knowledgeable than myself. So, let's talk generally today, but put people's minds at rest a little bit about what they're likely to find in the terms of financial change when they get here.
Yeah, we do have Pablo. He's a lawyer with a master's degree in tax, and he does online and in-person consultations. He's from KPMG, and then we have Alberto, who's an accountant from PricewaterhouseCoopers, and they have a think about, I should know this, they have like 4 or 5 support staff over in the Marbella office. You imagine Marbella, tax capital of the world. But it's important to obviously take advice from a professional. Hopefully it's someone from justlawsolicitors.com, but people have a huge choice. I have to confess, I have a business law degree, but I know very, very little about Spanish tax, and I know so little. I know not to give people advice on Spanish tax. I know basically my advice is just a few basic points and then take advice from a professional.
Yeah, I just think that a lot of the people who are going to be moving here are retired. If you're thinking of coming here to be employed or buying a business, obviously your tax requirements are going to be a lot more complicated. And I agree with you that they should definitely take advice from your expert. But, for the average pensioner, particularly coming from the UK, it is a sort of an unknown. And I think if we can just give them some simple reassurance today, that might be sufficient to help them make the decision.
Yeah. My tax affairs, I would describe them as complex, and obviously Pablo does my taxes, and I was pleasantly surprised when I got my tax return. That's all I'm saying. I was pleasantly surprised. It's not like the doom and gloom that people spread. I think the first point that we need to deal with, which applies equally to everyone, is at what point do you become a Spanish tax resident? Because if you're not a tax resident, you don't have to submit the resident tax return.
Correct. So if you're not going to be living here for more than 83 days, turn off now.
183 days.
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
183 days. And of course, I think it makes more sense. The Spanish tax year is the 1st of January to the 31st of December. Whereas if you're listening in the UK, it's from April to April. Americans, you probably might have a sensible tax year from January to December, like the Spanish.
That's right. So if you're here, as I say, and particularly we're talking to pensioners today, or those with both private pensions and state pensions, if you're going to live here for 183 days or more, you will be a tax resident, and you must file a tax return every year declaring your worldwide income. So people ask me, do I have to pay tax on my state pension? And the answer is yes. If you would have paid it in the UK, why would you not pay it here? We'll talk about personal allowances and so on in a minute and tax rates, but basically you will be paying tax on your worldwide income for the previous calendar year, as you said. So it's much simpler than the April to April.
Yeah.
Yes, you can still we have been for the past, or I have been for the past 17 years. My wife got hers a little bit after me. But if you can draw your state pension from the UK, if you retire in Spain, providing you've made sufficient national insurance payments and you're of the right retirement age.
Yeah. I think one of the traps that people fall into is that, and it may not apply to a lot of the people listening to this, but people just say, oh, it's 183 days. And as a general rule, that's right. But when you sit down with a tax expert like Pablo, there's also a few other things to consider. Economic ties. If your primary professional or economic activities are based in Spain, you may be deemed to be a tax resident. But that's maybe more for people who are employed or in business or who have financial investments. So you couldn't invest a load of money in Spain and then clear out and think you're not going to get clobbered by not clobbered, have to pay Spanish tax because you could be deemed to have economic ties. And another one that people sometimes don't think the Spanish Hacienda tax office know about is if the family is here, but you're trying to get away by spending less than 183 days, the Hacienda, the Spanish tax office, could decide that you have family ties here and say that you're a tax resident. But that isn't going to apply to the majority of English people who are thinking of moving to Spain.
That's right. So let's go back to the pensioner. Okay, the state pension is one of the pensions that will be taxed, will be deemed to be earned income in the same way as it is in the UK.
Yeah.
But you may also have a private pension, and I certainly did when I came here. And in fact, some of that may be offshore. I managed to lump together some of my small private pensions and invest them in something called a QROPS, which is a qualifying resident overseas pension scheme.
Wow.
Very complicated. But,
wow. I'm impressed.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was just a way of sweeping together some of the small amounts. And in the early days, before we received my wife's state pension as well, we would draw down from that investment in order to supplement my investment. So people sometimes say to me, well, what if I've invested some money and I can just draw on that? Yes, you can. But of course, it's still earned income because you are physically drawing money out. If you leave the money where it is, and if the pot increases in value, that's fine. But if you physically take that as an income, then you have to pay tax on it, of course, in the same way as you would in the UK. Yeah. If you live in a country, you've got to pay towards the upkeep of that country. And just because you're moving to a foreign country like Spain, why would you not want to stay legal? And why would you not want to contribute to that country's pot?
Absolutely. And I think we need to mention briefly double taxation treaties. So basically what that means is some countries, I haven't got a full list in front of me, but Canada, United States, the UK, they have a tax treaty with Spain, which means that you don't pay tax twice. If you would say to the Spanish authorities, well, look, this is my tax bill from the UK. I've paid that. And you see a tax advisor or do it yourself, and you don't pay twice on the money. But what's important is to remember that, and again, this is for everybody in the world, but the English definition of being tax resident is a bit peculiar, isn't it? So you could find yourself being a Spanish tax resident and an English tax resident at the same time.
Yes, and this applies to a lot of people who retire over here. For example, if you're an ex-government employee, there's a lot of police officers, retired police officers here, civil servants, teachers. Their pensions, their employment pensions, are paid net of tax. So, in other words, the government assumes that the tax has been taken away before they pay it to you. And you're
Okay.
quite right. They won't be taxed again because
Mm.
at the end of the year, you'll get a tax voucher saying that, X amount has been deducted from your pension payment
Mm.
before we gave it to you. So that has to be taken into account in your Spanish tax return. And if you prove to the Spanish taxman that you've paid that in the UK by attaching this document, which I'm not sure of the actual number of it, but that
Idea.
will prove that you paid that in the UK. So yeah, that's a question I get a lot of times by government employees, ex-government employees in the UK who retire over here and are concerned that they will be taxed twice. The answer is you can't be taxed twice.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's basically it. So yeah, there are things in place where you don't you don't pay tax, right? The other thing that we need to mention, just as a little offshot, while I remember, is capital gains tax. Because again, I apologize to everybody in other countries, but in England, if you sell the house that you live in, your primary residence, and you make a nice big profit, no one's going to tax you in England. However, that is not the case in Spain. So a lot of people who are selling their house in Spain, sorry, selling their house in the UK and moving to Spain, they could have a capital gain on their UK property. Now, if they then I'll give you a basic example. If you sell your house on the 1st of January and you move to Spain on the 2nd of January, you're going to spend more than 183 days in Spain. And if that happens, you're a tax resident, as we've explained, and you would pay capital gains tax. Now, to avoid that, quite legally, you don't have to be some kind of like shady millionaire, is just spend less than 183 days in Spain, and you'll avoid that. Now, there are exceptions for people over 65 and reinvestment. So again, like anything, take advice on that because if you're moving from one country to another, you can avoid this tax. I mean, we've had people who didn't know this and they've had to sort of get out of Spain for a few weeks, but it's completely avoidable. You just need to take advice and make sure you don't get hit by a capital gain tax. And it does apply equally if you sell a property in Spain, anywhere in the world. So just be careful of the capital gains tax implications if you're thinking of moving to Spain as well.
Okay, so let's having decided that you are a resident here and you are going to be a tax resident, when do you have to file your tax return, which we've already said is based on the previous calendar year, and you
Yeah.
have to fill in a tax return and submit it by the 30th of June.
Yeah.
And normally you can't start filing until the beginning of April because the government hasn't set the personal allowances and the tax rates, which we'll move
Yeah.
on to in a minute. So the first thing to say is, you need to start thinking about it now, and you have to get yourself ready to do that tax return by the 30th of June.
Yeah.
Now, very few individuals can actually do that tax return themselves because you have to normally have access to the system and the software, etc. And the average pensioner, without being disrespectful, probably wouldn't understand enough about the tax system to do that. So a lot of us, tend to use an abogado, or in your case, if you've got an expert on your firm who can deal with some of the more complicated cases. But if it's fairly straightforward, an abogado, I've been charged about €100 for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
To do the job, and at least doing it that way, that everything that's submitted will be legal, shall we say, and inserted in the system in the right way.
Yeah. Abogado, for everybody listening, is a lawyer, a solicitor. I mean, they don't divide the legal profession in Spain, so it'd be like solicitors and barristers in the UK. But abogado is just a lawyer. Some people translate it as a solicitor. Yeah, Pablo's an abogado, a lawyer, but I don't know what made him do it. But he then studied for a master's degree in tax. But I suppose if you live in Marbella, that's quite a relevant subject.
Yes, so he's your man if you've got lots of investments and complicated businesses. Okay,
Yeah.
another question that keeps getting well, can I make the decision to pay my tax in the UK because I understand it's cheaper, you'll get a higher personal allowance and so on. We've already proved to you now, I think by now, that you can't. But the other point is that people don't necessarily understand personal allowances are set slightly differently here, and they may well be lower than you're used to in the UK, which the reason for the personal allowance is that it means you can take a certain amount of income without having to pay tax.
Yeah.
And the personal allowance here for someone over 65 is 6,700. And over
Right.
75, which is me,
Hey.
is 8,100.
Wow.
Now, if your worldwide income, so all your pensions or your drawdowns of capital and all the other things, exceed those amounts, then you have to pay tax at a certain a sliding scale, if you like,
Yeah.
of rates. So the lowest tax rate is 19%, and that's for the first 12,450. So let's say the first 12,500. Then it moves up from 12,500 to 20,000. By the way, these are rates based on last year. I don't know yet whether those will be adjusted this year. So don't take these as read at the moment. They will be confirmed in the next couple of months. So the next tax band is 24%. Up to 20,200, and 22,000 to 35,200 is 30%. It will go on sliding up, but all you need to know is those rates are fixed. They are reviewed each year, but they will be different to what you are perhaps used to paying in the UK and what you're paying in the US or wherever else you've come from. But that doesn't mean to say that you can choose to be taxed back in your home country because you think the rates are better.
No, it's not the case. And I think there's something strange with military pensions, isn't it? I think you briefly mentioned it, that Spain doesn't tax foreign military pensions if there's a tax treaty, because they're only taxable in the country of origin. So there's but again, take advice on that because it's very, very complicated.
Yeah, as I said, this refers in the UK to government employees, ex-civil servants, police officers, teachers, and yes, military personnel as well. Those pensions are counted as occupational pensions and will be taxed at source. In other words, before the money comes into your bank, the tax is taken off, so you can't be taxed again.
Yeah.
And we've confirmed how you can avoid that by submitting as part of your tax return the voucher which states what tax has already been paid in your country of origin.
Yeah. The other thing to note is don't go rushing to your tax advisor in May and June and say, here it all is, because you can imagine what life's like for these people in May and June. Try and sort the paperwork out now and pop it in now, and they'll have more time to do the work. Thinking of Pablo, don't darken his door at the last moment because he's going to be flat out.
But if you know what information that person will require, I mean, I keep a spreadsheet during the year. So each month when my pensions and my wife's pension come in and my occupational pensions, I put those figures in, on a sort of monthly basis. And then that adds it all up at the end of the month, the end of the year. And so when my abogado gets that information, it's fairly straightforward. And all she has to do is interpret that and put it into the Hacienda system, which will then calculate how much tax I have to pay. And that's the next issue, which, again, people get confused about, because once you've submitted that tax return, then you're required to pay it in two installments, one in June and one in November.
Okay.
And they are on set dates, and you know in advance what that amount's going to be when you filed your tax return. And your abogado's told you how much you're due to pay, I think there is possibility of, if you want to adjust the amounts in the two figures, you can do. Say, if you want to pay less in June and more in November, you can. But I take whatever the recommended amount is, and then lo and behold, on a particular date in June and November, that amount is taken directly from your bank account. So you're paying it a year in arrears, if you like, and you know exactly to the day when that amount will be taken from your bank, and having approved your filed tax return by the 30th of June, you'll know how much. So it is a little bit more reassuring, and at least you know in advance what it's going to be. And to that end, if you like, in the early days, before I had the advantage of my wife's pension, I would draw down from my investment and my cure ops I talked about earlier, an amount which would cover the amount of tax that I was going to have to pay in June. So there's no reason why you shouldn't do that. But obviously, once you've drawn that down, that's income next year, and you're going to be taxed on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing as well is that you might understand the tax regime in Canada, America, the UK, South Africa, wherever. But what's interesting is here they have different ways of doing things. I remember I had one query from one client, and they owned some, I think it was rental property in the UK, and there's asked, like, why do they need to know how much I paid for my house? And I, as someone has some English tax qualifications from a law degree, I thought, well, that's a bit weird. So I said, well, why do you need to know this? Oh, because in Spain, the percentage of the purchase price of the property is deductible from income from rent or something, but don't quote me on that. But I just want to make the point that not every single country has the same way of calculating taxes. There was a strange deduction that I became aware of just because somebody asked me the question. So yeah, they have a completely different way of doing it in some cases. But yeah, the abogado or whoever can give you the advice that you need to do that.
Yeah. No, that's fine. I haven't yet started to talk about the dreaded Form 720. Do you know anything about this, John? Because maybe you've had to fill one in. I've
probably signed one, but I've heard of it and I've probably signed one. But you probably know a lot more about it than I do.
Well, we all, when we become taxpayers in Spain, have to submit what's called a Form 720. It's an online declaration that you have to submit by the 31st of March, which declares your worldwide assets, investments, savings, shares, everything you own outside of Spain. Yeah. If it's greater than 50,000. Now, if we're talking to, the majority of people here, pensioners, maybe that is probably the limit. But there are other people, and this is looking after the interests, if you like, of the Spanish government. There are people with huge amounts of money perhaps stashed away in Swiss bank accounts. We won't mention any past kings or prime ministers or presidents. We won't get into the politics of this, but it has occurred in the past that people who should be paying tax on their investments have squirreled them away somewhere very quietly. But he's now living somewhere in the Middle East, but we won't go into that today.
Yeah, I think
if you are a first-time taxpayer in Spain, finding yourself in this situation, you must make sure that if your worldwide savings and assets exceed 50,000, that you fill in this form, and you have to do that online again. So you'll need the help of a tax expert to do that. And although you should, maintain this, you only have to resubmit it every year if the value of the assets have grown by more than 20,000. So in other words, most of us who have bonds or shares or whatever, they're going to go up and down in value. And hopefully, if we've done our investments correctly, they will be creeping up slowly. Also, if you've sold an asset or closed an account and opened a new one, again, you should keep that 720 form up to date. But basically, be careful, because that 720 declares and to be legal, you must do that, because if you get caught out and a bank in the Cayman Islands, reports to the Spanish government, you've got a few millions stashed away there. They could go back 5 years, and tax you on that misdeclared income.
Right. Yeah. I think I've probably done. I just get told to sign various things. Check this is right, and I don't really pay that much attention to them all. But yeah, I've been a tax resident here for a long time now. But yeah, but like I say, I mean, there we are. Just look at the question of tax. You can get a simulation from Pablo or anybody if you don't know what your tax bill could be, and you could sort of balance that. Well, am I going to move to Spain? Well, I'll just see what tax I have to pay. Otherwise, I might not move to Spain. I might just spend less than 183 days in Spain. People can, take advice and get all the figures and play with them and decide what's best for them.
Yeah. Now, having said that, John, you're sort of giving someone there an opt out, if you like. But there is one more tax I must tell you about, and that is the non-resident tax.
Oh, yes, the non-resident tax, yeah.
So even though you've got a holiday home here, don't think you're going to get away with it, because your property is enjoying, and I'm not standing up for the Spanish government here, but why shouldn't they tax them in some ways? Your property is enjoying the benefit of paved roads, and whilst you're here visiting, you have access to various services, etc. So be aware that non-rented non-residents, if they don't rent out their properties to make any money out of it, they just have a property to which they come X number of weeks or months a year, they still have to pay a non-resident tax, which is based on 1.1% of the catastral value. Now, that's a sort of term which, once you start to look at properties over here, you may come across. And it's, I don't know how to describe it in UK terms, but it's basically the value which it's not necessarily the sales price of your property. It's the value on the property register, if you like. And that's the basis on which you pay your local taxes and so on. And so people in the UK will be aware of a similar value of their house, which tends to lag behind the market value. So you won't be paying 1.1% of the 350,000 you've just paid for it, but it'll be a slightly lower value, which the tax man has based it on maybe 4 or 5 years ago even.
Yeah, a lot of people seem to pay around about 200, but again, it's impossible to say for everybody because it does vary.
Yeah. And that has to be paid by the 31st of December. So that's a different timetable. And it can catch out some people with holiday homes here in the early days until it catches up with them. But make sure that you have given your bank account, and that will be paid automatically by the end of the year. Otherwise, again, if that catches up with you in the years to come, it could cost you a lot of money.
Yeah. But like I said, the non-resident tax, it's usually in the low hundreds. But again, if you've got a huge villa in Marbella, that probably isn't the case. But as always, if you're thinking about buying a property, speak to Belen, our property lawyer, and say to her, look, I'm thinking about buying this property. What's my EB tax going to be? That's equivalent of council tax. I'm not going to live here. What's my non-resident tax going to be? Ask all the questions before you put the money down, so to speak.
Yeah, and if you're still listening, people out there who now think, what the hell am I doing moving to Spain if I've got to pay all this tax? You have to pay tax wherever you live. Yeah. And you may compare what we've talked about here with what you're paying at the present, but my view to people is think of the overall advantages of living here. Yes, you may be paying slightly more than you would if you lived in the UK, but there are a huge raft of advantages in terms of the standard of living here, the cost of living, the climate, the relaxed pace of life. You need to think about the overall picture rather than Am I going to be worse off financially in Spain by the fact that the tax rate is 2% higher, or the personal allowance is lower? You've got to look at this as a lifestyle, and this comes back to how we started the program, which is that's why we wrote the book, which was not just about the legal issues of how to get a visa and how much tax you're going to pay, but the fact that it's a huge lifestyle change. And you have to accept that some of these issues, it's like having a set of scales in your head. The scale on how much it's going to cost you in tax may be a little bit heavier on one side, but on the other side, the fact that I'm taking my wife out to dinner again tonight, seem to go out every week now, which I couldn't afford to do in the UK. There are so many other advantages, and outside the sun is shining. And we were sitting outside on the terrace the other day in the afternoon in the middle of February. You couldn't do that in the UK.
No, that's it. It's just a question of sitting down and working it all out. We've podcast, if you go back, Vernon and I talk about the cost of living here. We talk about the healthcare system. I think for an American, you live 6 years longer here, and I think for a Brit, you live 3 years longer here. I think that's the statistics I found according to Google. But you can go back and listen to all the different podcasts. And we encourage people to rent first. We encourage people to visit in the winter, in the summer, and just make sure it's for you.
Absolutely, and I'm sure those extra years that you're gaining because of the healthier lifestyle or whatever are more than worth it for the extra tax you might pay. I'm not saying that it's always going to be more expensive, and if your tax situation is in any way more complicated than the simple pensions that I've talked about today, take advice. And your man seems to have his master's degree in tax, and he will know far more about Spanish tax system than I do.
And get the tax return to him early, not at the last moment, because the poor guy, he'll kill me if he thinks everybody turns up at the end of June. Well, anyway, Vernon, thanks for coming on, and hopefully we haven't put everybody off.
It was a pleasure, and I agree with you. We hope we haven't put people off, because we've given enough detail for people to get a flavour of it. But there's far more to life in Spain than paying Spanish tax.
Absolutely, and
so say all of us.
Just to end, we don't have any advertisers or sponsors or anything like that, but if people want to listen to episode 12.5, Concordia's horse rescue always needs a few euros, and you can sign up for €1 a month and try and get her out of the predicament that she's in with all the animals. A bit of internet begging at the end, but thanks as always, Vernon, and no doubt we'll be back on when another subject crops up and we need to talk about it.
Yep, I've got to get on now and start working on my tax return.
Okay, thanks as always. Bye-bye.